It's difficult to talk about Summit Steps of Solace without going, it's a Celeste-like or it's a Celeste clone, and it is, but it feels and plays slightly differently and stands on its own 2 feet to some degree. And so I hope I've addressed the obvious elephant in the room, and now we can get on to the actual full review. In Summit Steps of Solace, you play as a younger brother trying to ascend a mountain whilst kind of talking an inner monologue in your head about having a conversation with your elder brother, which has passed away. Now, you'll be doing this by walking, jumping, climbing, occasionally gliding, and sometimes grapple hooking your way around different levels. The kind of gliding and grapple hooking is very much in the final third of this game. The majority of this game is set up for you to try and get around single screen puzzles or platforming traversals, I'd get. There's a couple of interesting mechanics and setups though for Summit Steps of Solace that take a little bit of getting used to, and it's largely around the hook mechanic. So when you walk forward and jump, the longer you press and hold jump, the higher and further you'll go. And if you're running on ice, then that gathers you up momentum and it kind of becomes like a big long jump. And then you'll also have wind that will either push you one way or another in certain stages. And honestly, that was probably the bane of my life in this game. Any stage with a wind bit in it just made me fill with dread and contributed largely to my over 250 deaths that I'd accumulated before I reached the summit. However, when you then jump and hit a wall, you'll then press the hook mechanic. And quite often there's an icicle that will be hanging on this wall that will then very quickly start to drop on you, and you'll need to jump back off it again so that you can then avoid the icicle. But it's because this acts like a double jump, but you're using various buttons, and there's a slight delay in when you press something to the speed of when you jump back off. And because you're jumping back off again, you kind of go up the wall. You really have to pay attention to things. Firstly, the fact that you're using multiple buttons to do wall jumps. But secondly, working out when you then want to hook back onto the wall on your way back down again, because you're so used to kind of wall jumping to get up, you'll actually ascend and then get yourself into a sticky situation by hitting other spikes or icicles and not giving yourself enough space to then kind of wall jump back off again when the next icicle comes down. And so many of Summit Steps of Solace's levels are designed around this mechanic that it takes a bit of getting used to. And particularly when you start to have collapsible platforms and things like that involved, and wind on top, that's where you accumulate death after death after death after death. However, I did reach the summit in just under 45 minutes. Just under 300 deaths, I think it was, by the end. I wasn't very good at this. But then that unlocks speedrunning mode, and then you've got all of the story beats removed, and it's literally you against the leaderboard trying to get to the end. There are achievements for completing the game under 30 minutes and 15. I will never get to that, and I will certainly never get the achievement for doing it without dying. 0.8% of people have at the time of this review, and well done to you. You are all far better gamers than I ever will. However, despite my kind of complaints and annoyances with some slight delays to the jumping mechanics, particularly when you're trying to like do a run across ice, for example, it felt a little bit inconsistent. Largely the rest of the game did feel consistent for me, and it was more a skill issue for me playing the game rather than the way the game's set up. The last thing I would like to talk about, though, is the game's soundtrack. It seems to use a really beautiful Oriental Alpine jazz soundtrack. It feels organic and fresh and breezy and light, and it suits the game exceptionally well, and I'd quite happily listen to that soundtrack outside of this game. And I think if you enjoy kind of modern jazz trios with a little bit of like ambient music hidden inside, you'll enjoy the soundtrack to this as you try to get to the summit. Summit Steps of Solace ultimately was actually quite a success for me, even if it did make me swear an awful lot. Here's my end stats, just in case anyone wants to try and beat me on their first run through. I'll see if I can beat it, and if I do, I'll pop it in the comments below.